This is a special edition of the MeidasTouch podcast. Here we are, late June, and Donald Trump has turned the United States on its head, lit up the United States, whether it's migrants being disappeared off the streets, American citizens as well, war in the Middle East, a trade war against the world that's been a complete and utter disaster. Donald Trump throwing bizarre and embarrassing dictator parades for himself. You've got Donald Trump's domestic policy, to the extent there is any, just utterly kind of blowing up in his, I don't even know what it is, the chaos every single day of social media posts and exclamation points and all caps. And, one day you wake up and he says he wants to reopen Alcatraz, and then everyone talks about Alcatraz, for a day, or Hannibal Lecter Day. And then he brings in and he invites the different world leaders into the Oval Office, and each one is more embarrassing and dangerous and odd and anti-American than the next. Just even the way the way the Oval Office looks, this bizarre fake bordello that's in there, and they bring in President Zelensky, and Trump yells at him, and the whole thing is weird. And they bring in Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and Donald Trump says all these horrifically offensive things in front of him. Or they bring in South Africa's President Ramaphosa, and then Donald Trump starts to come up with lies about a white genocide taking place in South Africa, while Ramaphosa has a white agriculture minister right there. And all of this is playing out in new media as well. We're all seeing all of these things in real time. And Donald Trump's latest polling from Reuters Ipsos, the lowest it has ever been. It's like the lowest polling at any point in time for presidents at this time in their term. And I want to spend time talking about how we talk about these things, how we message these things. You all saw over about 2 weeks ago now, the No Kings protests. Millions and millions of Americans just fed up with this, saying this isn't the United States of America. So I want to bring in Anat Shenker-Osorio, who leads the Words to Win By podcast, messaging guru we've had on the show before. But I thought it was important to do this special edition and to really hear from you, Anat, about how you think just the pro-democracy community in general should be addressing. How should we be talking? How should leaders be focused on this? And what's your data showing?
Oh, where to start? So let me start by saying arguably the least controversial thing I ever say, but somehow the one that seems hardest to penetrate, which is that a message that nobody hears by definition cannot persuade them. If no one hears what you're saying, then you did not actually move them. And so what that means in this cacophony of horrors and unrelenting sound that I think you laid out really, really aptly, and we could probably pile onto there, we cannot be cats with a laser pointer where we are continuously, can you believe this just happened? Can you believe this just happened? Can you believe he just said this? Can you believe this just happened? Because then we couldn't possibly break a signal through the noise. What we know about successful efforts, both within our own history and in other countries where I'm unlucky enough to work frequently on different anti-authoritarian movements, is that the keys to actually confronting and toppling this kind of force is, number one, to create a really big we. Number two, so to call people in. Number two, to call the villains out, to be very explicit and clear about who exactly is behind all of this. And then number three, believe it or not, it's to paint the beautiful tomorrow. It's to paint an alternative. And so what does that mean in concrete terms? In concrete terms, as I've argued for a long time, we need to be calling this atrocity to steal people's Medicaid, to abduct our neighbors off of our streets, to empower law enforcement to harm us, the MAGA murder bill, because it is a murder bill. People are going to be killed. And the through line across all of the MAGA regime's agenda, notice I say regime, not government, not administration, this regime of the bullies for the billionaires, also intentional language, is to kill anyone who does not live, look, or love like them, whether they reside domestically or abroad. And it is that focus on the life and death stakes as opposed to procedural things like, they didn't follow the Constitution, they're not obeying the rule of law. That matters to people like us. It doesn't matter to the average person. Life and death stakes is what we have to foreground.
So let's talk about, that's the budget bill. Any other aspects of the budget bill that you've seen in your messaging, calling it a murder bill? Yes, we call the Trump regime a regime because that's what they are. What have you been seeing as people have been talking about this budget bill, which takes away healthcare from 15 million Americans, this massive transfer of wealth to the billionaires? And we also learn more stuff every day, 250 million public land going to potentially be sold off to Trump's friends. So to talk to us about some areas that you think are really moving people.
Yeah, I mean, people are certainly understandably very, very upset about the prospect of Medicaid. And I guess what I would lift up about that, back to the first point I made, which is that you have to break a signal through the noise first and foremost, because there is so much going on. Most people are just not following the details. And so their clarity, we do focus groups, weekly. We've been doing them since the end of 2020. At this point, we're like at 260 focus groups. And for the most part, people are low information. And that is very hard for political junkies to understand. Most people are not following the ins and outs of any of this. And so when they hear about the specific provisions, yes, they are horrified and upset. But what makes them actually hear that? Ironically, I think the biggest favor done to us, and I hope people can hear the sarcasm in my voice, is Joni Ernst. Far be it from me to credit her with anything, but her doing her ghoulish 1-2 punch of, everyone's going to die, and then followed up by the cemetery cameo performance, that is what actually broke through and made the life or death stakes clear to people, followed up by that idiotic "I am not a crook" press release from the White House of this bill is not going to kill you, which is a perfect example that is the messaging that is touching a nerve. We know because they're reacting back to that. So what is breaking through is really this idea that this is going to put people's lives in danger. And that is true for various provisions that you lifted up.
Let's talk about, you see it in the streets. I mean, these masked ICE agents who are, traveling around, profiling people. We don't even know, are they ICE agents? Are they people deputized as ICE? I mean, they're shielding their faces. I mean, it looks straight out of Nazi Germany, and they're beating people. They're going into car washes and Home Depots, and they're going after vendors who have been at the same corner by a Home Depot selling tacos to people who are picked up to try to work jobs and support their families. And, while there has been polling data that reflected Americans in general want there to be borders and strong borders, you see that when I think when you get into the data, people believe that there should be pathways to citizenship for people who work and pay taxes, and people understand that migrants are human beings who are productive members of our community, who we live with and who we love. And so talk to us about that.
Yeah. So the first thing that I would say is that there's an extraordinarily important messaging shift that has been occurring, and we need to stay doggedly on. And people be like, why are you fixating on one word? This one word, which I'm about to introduce, is a simple thing you can do. It's easy to remember, and it is indicative of the narrative shift we require. And that is not talking in the sanguine language of mass deportations. The word deportation has a legal meaning. It implies that there is due process. That's what a deportation is. And I think everyone listening and watching knows that is not the case in most of these situations. These are not deportations. They are abductions. And when we speak about them rightly, accurately as abductions, what we see in public opinion is that people have a massively different response to sort of this theoretical construct of mass deporting people here who are criminals, and abducting our neighbors off of our streets. So that's the first thing. And then the bigger thing that I think is just extraordinarily important to underscore. I can't remember, Ben, are you a parent? Do you have kids?
I do. Baby girl, 8 months.
Jimena. Well, I'm a parent. My kids are slightly older than yours. And so I'm going to tell you a thing you likely already know, which is that children do not listen to what we say. They listen to what we do. And that is not just true of children. That is true of human beings across ages. And the reason that I raise that is because if you live inside the MAGA narrative, if you live inside the fascist power grab narrative, it's always the same thing. It is those people who came here the wrong way, who are dangerous, who don't believe in our way of life, who don't work, but somehow do work because they take our jobs at the same time. You explain that to me. It's the scapegoating narrative, and it's always what authoritarians rely upon. If you lived inside of a narrative in which the US and especially blue cities and blue states are under siege from some usurping force, then in order to make people believe that narrative is actually true, you would have to act in accordance. And so Trump unleashing military and unleashing who the hell knows what these forces are, as you said, masked, unmasked, that is in concert, and that is lending credence and power to their narrative that there's a war going on, and it's a war that's being conducted by these undesirable people. They do the thing that backs up the thing that they say. Does that make sense, what I'm outlining?
Yep.
And so on the response side, if we truly believe, and I, to the depths of my being, truly believe that this is a regime of the bullies for the billionaires, this is every hallmark, ask any credible political scientist, of a fascist power grab, then it's not enough to merely say we must also do. We must act in accordance. So what does that mean? It means asking ourselves, in the case, for example, of the assassination of Melissa Hortman, extraordinary public servant and leader in Minnesota, it means Democrats introducing, again, an assault weapons ban and calling it the Melissa Hortman Act. It means Democrats introducing a Ronald Reagan Act, hat tip to Waleed Shahid for that idea, for expanding a roadmap to citizenship. It means that third piece of the narrative we must accomplish, which is being in proposition, not merely in opposition. We actually have to be introducing the kind of world that we want to be living and governing in.
That makes a lot of sense. And so we've talked about disastrous budget bill, murder bill. We've talked about abductions of people in the United States. Let's talk about and a war that Trump has unleashed in our neighborhoods against our people, not criminals. We all want criminals to be arrested. There's process for that. We don't want these attacks on people who are not criminals at all, and people deserve due process. Talk about the war in the Middle East. As Donald Trump, without consulting Congress, unauthorized, unconstitutional, brings the United States in a war again with Netanyahu, without our allies. Trump shoulder to shoulder, Netanyahu against Iran. We're not speaking with our traditional G7, or NATO allies. How? And it seems that a lot of people in Trump's base don't like this, and he promised them that he was against this stuff. So it's interesting that this issue is something that seems to be one of those bubble piercing or echo chamber piercing types of issues. Now, you see them go through ways they try to justify it. Oh, when he says regime change, he kind of means like a peaceful regime change, like he's encouraging the people to do it on there. He doesn't actually mean regime change. So they go, you see them struggling to try to justify their fascist framework, but talk about that.
Yeah. So to state the obvious, no one wins in war. In war, there are no winners. And yes, people can tell me weapons manufacturers win and authoritarians win. human beings don't win, even to the depths of our being weapons manufacturers, like to the extent that they have any humanity at all, that piece of them is not winning. But yes, I take the point that people can make an extraordinary amount of money off of war, and it has ever been so. The way to talk about this is, first of all, this is a war on Iran. It is not a war with Iran. And that little tiny preposition actually makes a difference, because with implies some sort of mutuality. This was an unprovoked aggression. We need to focus, as I said before, on lives and not on process. Everything you said is, of course, absolutely true, that, he doesn't have this authority. But rather than speak about this as unconstitutional, not because that is inaccurate, that's accurate, but because the Constitution doesn't get most people other than legal scholars out of bed in the morning. What gets them out of bed in the morning and into the streets and into opposition and into general strike and into direct action and into boycotts, which are all of the levers required to bring down authoritarian forces, is stuff that feels like it impacts their life, their family, their well-being, etc. So we need to talk about this as Trump's war on Iran, not a war with Iran without any kind of qualifier. And we need to make clear that this is their agenda as ever at home as it is abroad, which is to unleash violence, endanger, and kill anyone who does not serve their purpose and does not advance their agenda, because it takes a lot of opposition. And so I think that the demand that folks are making, obviously, that Congress step up and do their duty and block the further escalation of this horrific violence, is right. And I think that we need to recognize that plunging people of various nations into war is what authoritarians do in order to grab, seize, and hold on to power. And that is as true for Netanyahu in Israel as it is for Trump here in the US, as it is for, let's face it, an extraordinarily dangerous Iranian regime that's doing no favors to its people either. There's no, let's not sugarcoat that that's some sort of magical wonderland of a set of rulers. What we're seeing here, and the messaging is really, no matter what we look like, where we live, or how we worship, at home, abroad, the Middle East, or beyond it, most of us want pretty similar things, which is to be able to hug our loved ones and be sure our kids are going to be okay at the end of the day. But today, this MAGA regime of the billionaires, of the bullies for the billionaires, is hell-bent on taking our freedoms, destroying our lives, and ruining our livelihoods. And they will grab power any way they can, including launching a war on Iran. We must bring U.S. troops and people of all nations out of harm's way by Congress stepping up and doing its duty and representing the will of the people who oppose this war. That needs to be copy edited because I just made it up on the spot, but more or less that's the message.
Just final kind of question for you on the messaging side. You and I had talked before about how dictators and bullies hate to be bullied back, hate to be mocked, hate to be, diminished. And so, we've seen with Donald Trump setting deadlines and then not meeting the deadlines, or 2 weeks, I need 2 weeks, I'll get back to you in 2 weeks. So there are people who have said, Trump always chickens out, the taco. There are people who are saying, the 2 week type of stuff. There are all those videos circulating showing him just like being inconsolable at that dictator parade he threw for himself when it did not go anywhere near how he envisioned it in his mind. Is that stuff effective? And do you have other thoughts along those lines of bullying the bully?
Yeah. So the name of the game with respect to confronting authoritarianism is refuse, resist, ridicule. We're in the ridicule category right now. The essential storyline of the authoritarian is that they are a strong man. And I use man because that's true nearly all of the time. There's very, very few counterexamples. There are a couple, but I'm using strongman in this case because it does apply. And so the idea behind them is that I am the all-powerful, all-knowing force, and I will rescue you and keep you safe from this make-believe danger, violence, like we talked about when we were speaking about Los Angeles and the unleashing of the military as a weapon against the American people. And what it's vital for us to do is to make clear what the origins and the sources of violence actually are. Otherwise, we cannot undo their scapegoating narrative. In the ridicule category, why that's so important is because public opinion, it's great what you lifted up, Ben, that his disapproval ratings and so on and so forth. But what we know as people living in this country, and, I'm a person, I say this all the time, public opinion is meaningless. I should know I get paid to measure it. If it were the case that public opinion alone made public policy, we would have abortion access. We would have basic gun safety measures. We would have universal health care. We would have, I could go on, and so could you, about the millions of things that 60, 70, 80, even 90% of Americans favor that we don't have. And so the name of the game is public action. And what ridicule does is it makes the would-be dictator seem confrontable rather than invincible. Because what we do see in our focus groups, and this is true across groups, is not a shock. People are scared. They are scared to take action. They are scared to stand up. I know that you personally have been under threat. And so I think that fear is understandable and easily understood. When we ridicule this giant orange turd, as some drag queens have rightly said, you pissed off the drag queens and now there's nobody to blend your bronzer. It makes him seem rightly small and therefore incentivizes and encourages more people to come together and actually take public action, which is essential.
Refuse, resist, ridicule. So the fact, though, that you said we're at the ridicule stage.
Not the stage. They all happen. Keep going. All of them.
But that's healthy when it keeps on going because authoritarians want you to submit. And I think what Trump and Musk and the architects of Project 2025 assumed, and I'll give you the final word, on this interview, but I think what they assumed is that the world would be very different right now. I think in their mind, they were going to have all the media kiss the gangsters ring at Mar-a-Lago. They were going to do all the things they were doing with the agencies. They were going to, they implemented Project 2025 with a ferocity that you would expect if you were watching this network, but they bulldozed the government. They tried everything. And I think that their plan was by now we would be a full-fledged, Trump's ruling like a dictator, but that the people would have submitted to the dictatorship. We now have this regime, this dictatorship, but the people aren't submitting. And what I talk frequently about on my Substack is I think the what's been unleashed on the streets, the peaceful protests, the sentiment that we're not going back, that continues to grow and grow and grow right now. And as hard and as difficult and as painful as things are, when I look at the No Kings protest and I saw in my city, Pasadena, 10,000 people out in Pasadena on the streets in Colorado and Lake Avenue. Pasadena, big cities, small cities, medium-sized cities, blue states, red states, purple states, people showing up. We basically hit close to that 3% mass mobilization number that everybody says is a key thing where real difference can be made. So with all of these difficult things, I feel optimistic in the spirit of Americans. And I think that what's so important, though, is with that spirit, with that passion, is to align the messaging to make sure that it all connects together. So I'll leave you with the last word.
Yeah, I think the reassurance I can give is that in other countries and other contexts, and I know this will be hard to wrap brains around, authoritarians in their initial sprint enjoy extraordinary amounts of public acclaim. So if you're talking about the initial, Duterte run in the Philippines, if you're talking about Orban in Hungary, if you're talking about Bukele in El Salvador up until the day, we're talking not just about majority approval, we're talking about super majorities of approval. And that's usually how sort of authoritarians get into power and hold on to their power. That is not the case, as you noted, not even close to it with Trump. And what mass demonstrations like No Kings do is they create what we call in psychology social proof. Social proof is merely, the middle school theory of messaging. People do the thing they think people like them do. There's a reason why there's a epically long line on this side of the street for that ice cream parlor and nobody waiting for the ice cream parlor across the street. It's because people do the thing they think people like them do. And so while these mass mobilizations may not have like the most clear and obvious target, what they do is they build public will and they create the sense that, lots of people think that this is anathema. Lots of people are repulsed by this. Lots of people are in the know. And in the know, I mean the KNOW and the NO in the opposition to this. And the more and more and more that builds, and the more and more that dominant sentiment, because it is the dominant sentiment, becomes visibly so, the more that pillars of support, like the business community, like the university community, like the legal community, draw away that support. When Trump was first inaugurated, let's be honest with ourselves, there were a bunch of billionaires going to kiss the ring. I think that they are seeing that there's no actual ROI on that investment, as disgusting as it was that they wanted to make it in the first place. I'm not excusing them. And so the name of the game, again, is to resist, to refuse, and to ridicule, to get in the way. To get in the way when they attempt to unleash their violence on us, and to be absolutely clear that this is the MAGA murder bill and the MAGA murder regime of the bullies for the billionaires, and that we, the people, will stand up for our freedoms, our families, and our futures.
Anat Shenker-Osorio. We should do these more often. These special editions really help, I think, tie everything together. And it's very helpful for those watching at home, and for, a lot of political leaders who watch this program to hear directly from you. Anat Shenker-Osorio also hosts Words to Win by podcast. Make sure you all check that out. I love listening to that. And if you wonder, hey, Ben, a lot of the messaging you talk about, it sounds a lot like Anat's. Yeah, because we talk to each other. That's why. Anat Shenker-Osorio, thank you.
Thank you.
And everybody hit subscribe. Let's get to 6 million subscribers.
The truth is more important than ever. Check out our new Truth Over Lies collection at store.MeidasTouch.com. All 100% USA union made.